Hi everyone, I'm Toriana Meadows and this is my week 1 reflection. Question 1 says, which concept from the readings had the most impact on your understanding of the American higher education system and why? Well, from reading chapter 1, I first noticed where higher education came from and the different traditions that were followed. Higher education first started the European way, which put the professor front and center and in charge. And then it eventually moved to the Western tradition, which first made the universities become a part of the knowledge. This is when public funding came into place, when advanced education eventually came around, and when better research eventually came around. I also found it very interesting that universities first started as grammar and language schools only, and then they eventually moved into engineering, business, and teaching as we know today. I feel like these had to be included eventually because of the societal demand. Society would vocalize that students coming out of college needed to know what was necessary in order for them to be successful in the workforce. So universities would collaborate with different industries to be sure that the students were receiving the knowledge necessary. So I felt that was very interesting because that's how it is today, where we go through field experience and different observations throughout our educational times. Question 2 says, identify and describe what you believe to be the major influences on American higher education. I was actually unaware of the different struggles that came about for the growth for colleges, so due to funding. So this was very interesting for me. Different colleges or universities had to receive funding from churches, or they had to, or some did receive public funding. Also, from reading in chapter 2, the different hierarchies made a major impact. If you were wealthy, then you went to a high-end school and received a better education. Whereas if you were not as privileged, you either did not receive that education or you received a lower-end education, which I thought was interesting. Religion also played had a major influence. And I felt like that was interesting because some schools were actually funded by different churches, but then you would have schools that would change criteria admissions in order for different religions not to be accepted into their school, which I felt was very interesting. And I feel like that had a major influence on higher education today, which is why we see a lot of different religions and what it's moved to now. After World War II, higher education went for a big turnaround. This is when the GI Bill came into place and when financial aid came into place. This is probably the time where there was the most disorder. But in my opinion, I feel like this was good disorder and it had a major influence. This is when those that were coming out of the military had the opportunity to be funded to receive an education and to enter the normal workforce. And this is also the time when those that were not as privileged or needed the extra help to receive that help through financial aid. So I felt that was a definitely a big change, but a positive change. Question 3 now goes into how can understanding the history and values of American higher education impact my role as a higher education leader. I actually learned a lot just from reading those 2 chapters, and I feel like now I want to make sure that students understand the funding that they receive and the funding that they can receive to help them receive the education that's necessary. Also, to help those students that maybe struggling through school, help them get the knowledge that is needed in order for them to be successful through their education. And then once they complete that education, to move into the workforce and to be successful. So although we see all of the changes that higher education went through, I feel like a lot of these changes impacted the way higher education is today. And I think that it will eventually change again, or will continue to change, and hopefully for the better. Thanks.